All right, I'll go ahead and do the roll. Nicole Bailey. I do not see her here. Andrea Chiribogaflor. Do not see her either. John Conley. Don't see him. Trevor Forbes.
Here.
Thank you. John Hahn. Actually, he responded as a show for in the invite, so he's not here. Troy Hill. Do not see him. Jim House.
Here.
Thank you. Nicole Lawless. Do not see her. Michael Pierce.
Here.
Thank you. Officer Prunski.
Here.
Thank you. Brandon Rich. Do not see him. Jeffrey Reister. Also do not see him. Nathan Riley, that's myself. I am here. And Joyanne Rusha. Does not look like she is here either. I did have a couple administrative things, Trevor, if you don't mind.
Yes, please.
Okay. So a couple things. Let me pull up my notes here. So first off, some of you may already be aware, the commission did initiate the towing NOPR, the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. So the towing rulemaking based on the legislation from last year has officially been kicked off. That happened back on the I believe it was the 22nd when that order was posted. As part of that decision, it was requested by the commission that the towing task force refile the report that we did last year that was due in November. We submitted it on time, as some of you may recall, back by that November 1st deadline that's in the statute. Since there wasn't a rulemaking to attach it to at that time, it essentially got placed in a repository docket where it's just been sitting there waiting to be reviewed, analyzed, dealt with. As part of the NOPR decision that came out back on the 22nd, the commission did explicitly request that the towing task force refile that same report into now the current docket for the rulemaking proceeding, which is hold on, it's 23. Hold on, I'll tell you what the docket number is. It is 23R-0085TO. I mean, that's. I expected something like that might happen. I thought maybe the commission would potentially either like administratively notice that or maybe move it over into the rulemaking proceeding. But it sounds like the cleanest way that the commission would prefer for it to be done is for us to just refile it on behalf of the task force into that rulemaking proceeding. John Roberts, is that something we could do?
Nate, are you asking if that's something that the task force could move to order now because we're short on quorum?
Well, and I'm just wondering if it even needs a vote. I mean, it's a report that's already been submitted. It's just where it goes at the commission. It's more of a formality more than anything else.
Yeah, that sounds like an administrative task. I don't see any problem with that.
Okay. Yeah. Is that something you'd prefer for us to do, or since you're the AG, would you prefer to do it? Would it be cleaner that way? What's your opinion on that?
I could prefer you to do it, and if you need any help, you know where I am, and I will bill you for that.
Fair enough. Thank you. Okay, so I'll take care of that as long as nobody has any issues with that. Again, it's the same report. It's just being filed into a separate proceeding where it can actually be addressed. So the other two items I had, or actually it might just be one more. Again, the compliance affidavits, I've received a handful. I think I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But I know we've had several other people beyond that actually either go through the training that we had back in January, or at least watch that recording and having gone through it that way. I just, again, if you haven't submitted it, please submit it. The ones I have so far are John Hahn, Jim Howes, Michael Pierce, Greg Prunski, Brandon Rich, Jeffrey Reister, and myself. So if I didn't call your name and you have either you went through the training in January or you've since watched that recording and kind of surrogately went through it, please submit that. I know I've sent several emails out with a copy of that affidavit. If you could please sign it and return it. It's something that the department wants, so I would appreciate that. Oh, one last thing. I've been alerted by the department that there's going to be another round of board and commission surveys coming from the department. I know we did it last year as well. I believe it was in March of last year as well. So expect to get an email from the department with some kind of a survey. I believe I saw it last year, and it wasn't anything too complex, but it was just, a little 10-minute survey to talk about your time on your respect. And this goes out to all the boards and commissions that the department oversees. So, which is dozens and dozens of different boards and commissions. So anyway, everybody gets one. So, I would encourage you to fill that out and submit it to the department. That's all I have. Thank you.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Nate. All right. So I just have some thought. I mean, obviously we can't do any official actions here, but I can get y'all's input, which I'd like on how we should move forward. I suspect that like the trend of kind of a lack of engagement is probably not going to reverse itself for a couple of reasons. One is like, this is what happened to the last task force. It kind of happened. They did a lot of work, but then once the work's done, it's kind of like, okay, well, like it's not a recurring thing, right? Although the nature of the meetings are recurring. Also, when the task force was expanded to 14, which is a great thing in theory, and I think it was awesome this last year to get some input from Mr. Pierce, especially because he was super engaged, but all the parties were really engaged too. I think that's super important. However, when that task force was kind of put together, there was a lot of kind of, I don't know, public attention on towing, and the attorney general was tweeting about people towers and lawmakers, and there was news things. It was just a thing, right? Kind of how rent control becomes a thing, and people get really excited about it or not excited about it regardless. And so I think there was a lot of attention, like, yeah, let's go get on this task force. But then once that's kind of passed, like people just don't really care anymore. I mean, obviously, like law enforcement cares, like they deal with this literally every day. Towers obviously care about it. Mr. Pierce lives in the community and he cares about it. Even at every meeting, and we really appreciate that, Mr. Pierce. But I don't think that the other members that have shown less engagement are going to get excited about it between now and kind of any time, unless it becomes more popular in the news and stuff. So I guess we have a couple paths we could take. One would be we could just continue every month to kind of show up, and then a couple of us join, and then we say no one's here, and then we end the meeting, right? So we can keep doing the same thing we've done for the last few months. That would maybe be a little silly. Alternatively, a lower lift might be to say, okay, like let's have two meetings. Let's schedule a meeting for 3 months from now. But maybe like I make a push, Nate makes a push. We like send emails out to the personal emails everyone and say, hey, we're gonna have fewer meetings, but we still think we should get on and just discuss any new issues that popped up, or maybe Nate has some things administratively to communicate or whatever, right? But still at least get together. But I think if we try to do that, twice a year, it's a lot easier to get those other folks engaged, at least for that one meeting. At least we get some participation. But I think the current path, it'll be very little participation except for a few of us. And so that's one path we could take, is to cut down the meetings, understanding like, hey, we're not going to produce a really huge, robust report at the end of the year. But I don't know that that's really necessary, to be honest with you. And so I want to hear kind of what you guys think, you folks think about kind of how we might want to proceed. Mr. Brunsky.
Yeah, I think if we cut down the meetings to every few months or something, I might be able to increase the frequency and number of people we can actually get in these meetings, because we don't really have much exactly pressing at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Riley.
I don't know the best way to move forward. I'll admit it's been a little disappointing, seeing the apparent lack of interest over these last few months. I mean, I kind of expected that after we submitted the report, there'd be a little bit of a dead period, but then people would pick back up and, re-engage and continue to want to explore some of these issues, especially with how we left the report when it was submitted back in November. But, there's a few people I know on our roster that were somewhat disengaged even prior to that. There's certain members that I've noticed that haven't attended a meeting in 8 or 9 months, and so I don't know the proper way to address that. This is my first time being appointed to a task force like this, so I don't know all the formal procedures associated with that kind of a scenario. But One thing I can say is that, the majority of our body, 12 of the 14 members that are part of this body are governor appointed positions, which means the governor specifically appointed you with the expectation that you were going to participate in whatever manner was expected. And so it's not like we've tapered off and said we're not going to have meetings anymore. We're still here. Some of us are still here. We're still holding the meetings. The expectation should be, that since these people were appointed by the governor, that they should, continue to engage, and represent the people that they have been selected by the executive branch to represent in these types of discussions. And so, my personal opinion, and again, I don't know the logistics of how this would work, is if somebody doesn't really feel like they want to engage in this body anymore for whatever reason, then they should resign their position and we should appoint somebody else to fill the spot and pick somebody who will engage. Is just my personal thoughts on that. And again, I don't know how that works, but yeah, there's definitely, especially the last, few months, there definitely has been the feel of, people just, they're too busy with other things or whatever. And yes, we don't have this, statutory deadline hanging over us like we did, 5 months ago. But at the same time, I think with how we set up that report, that was due back in November, I think the expectation is that we would continue to work on these things, perhaps not as vigorously as before because there was a statutory deadline, but still continue to explore these issues. And I still think that's a good, place to go and a place to be. So that's my personal opinion on it all.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a third option you kind of alluded to, is that one option would be to say okay, like some members who they're very busy, who knows, right? They're very busy folks. So frankly, it's easy for me to justify spending this one time a month because it's my livelihood. But maybe reach out to them and be like, hey, would you be interested in letting someone else fill this role? And then seeing if we could get kind of some other folks from those subset groups engaged. And I guess I don't know the process for doing that, or if that's even a thing. I think they would have to kind of resign formally, and then they have to put out a new thing to get people involved. My fear is that it's if the governor put on his website right now, we want someone to fill this spot in the governor's towing task force, he might get one email. It's just not a thing that people, I have to be honest, it's just not something people care about. On average.
Well, and I've, I did most of the recruiting to fill this body way back when, and it was hard, to get people, because it's not just finding people to fit into all the little, we're a unique task force in that we all, or at least I assume, John Roberts, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like we're a unique body in that we all are set up to represent very specific groups, interest groups, communities, etc. And so not only is it hard to find somebody who fits into all these little boxes, but finding people who want to make the time commitment and basically say, yes, I am going to engage, I am going to participate. It was no small feat putting this group of 14 people together. And the other thing I wanted to mention that you kind of, brushed up against is, the whole part about, if you don't want to engage anymore, it seems the most appropriate thing to do is to resign. We saw something similar with Captain Dittman when he retired, and he appropriately resigned. And then it was a little easier on that case because that's a position that's appointed by the chief of the state patrol. So it's not as you don't have to jump through as many hoops as when the governor appoints you, because you have to go through our executive department, and then it goes over to the governor's office, then it goes to the governor to go through all those stages. So it's a little more complex when it's one of these other 12 positions that are appointed by the governor. But I think people, and I've raised this many times over the past, year plus, is, there is a statutory mechanism whereby if people just don't have the time to attend a meeting for whatever reason, you can appoint somebody else to come and represent you in said meeting. And I've always encouraged people to use that if they're not going to be attending the meetings. If you're not going to come, see if you can appoint somebody to essentially come on your behalf. And all that would take is an email, to me or Hadija to say, hey, I'm not going to attend this meeting, but this is who is. Here's their email address. Please invite them. They're going to attend on my behalf. That's really all you have to do. So I wish people use that option more. If people really are not attended because they're too busy with other things, I really wish they would invoke that provision of the statute and have somebody come on their behalf, just so we can at least meet the quorum under that pretense. So.
Yeah. Well, if it makes us feel better, there's a lot of lawmakers who don't show up to their committee meetings either, so they actually get paid. So it's we're not alone in our struggles. Mr. Pierce. Oh, I think you're on mute, Mr. Pierce. There you go.
I'd like to offer a slightly different perspective. I think we would get some better attendance if we had more of a plan in our agenda on items we're going to try and work through. Because currently our agenda is basically just open discussion. And that's, at least in my experience running meetings, just an open discussion agenda tends not to get many attenders. Whereas if they're seeing something that they want to weigh in on, then that's much more incentive to join. So there's that. I also think that there may be some disappointments that we were going to work on certain things and didn't really actually come to conclusions that seem to be where people were hoping, other members of the committee were hoping that we could get to. And so if we are not working on those things that we did not quite achieve last year, that's also a disincentive to continue attending meetings. If you're not seeing forward progress being made, then that's a downer. So my sense is if we can get a more thorough worked out agenda for next meeting, that would be good. And just to remind you of where I thought there were three things that it seemed like we had left hanging that that would serve us well to address. One was that there were no recommendations whatsoever made about the rates, and we basically decided we just didn't have enough data or conversation to make any recommendations for changes. It's not that we didn't think that there shouldn't be any changes. It's just that we didn't feel like we were in a position to do so. And so I think there's, at least for me, there's been an expectation that we are going to continue working on this and actually come up with some recommendations at the end of this year. So that was topic one. Topic two is non-consensual rates. And consensual rates versus non-consensual rates, and analyzing the difference between the two. And so that's something that, again, I think we had talked about how to do this, and then John wrote up a very nice perspective from the towing industry's vantage point, and that struck me as, again, a really good starting place to actually begin doing an analysis of the difference between consensual versus non-consensual. That's something I think we could fruitfully work on. And then finally, there was the issue of the survey, and the survey, we learned a lot about the questions that we asked, and had we had time to do it over, different ways we could ask some questions, and some further questions that it would be nice to include that we didn't include. And in both cases, without a more refined survey, we're finding difficulty in using the data from that survey in a constructive way. So those strike me as three things to be able to work on. And then finally, related to the last one, we had discussed that that it would be really good for the PUC as part of the registration, annual registration, to basically start surveying the members as part of their registration. And so it seemed like another real fruitful direction for us to move in is to start recommending questions that could be included on a survey that needs to be answered annually, or whenever the registration renewals are due. So that strikes me as quite a lot that we could be working on, that would be fruitful. And if we can just get the ball rolling on those, we might stimulate some attendance again.
Okay, yeah, so your point, I think that's fair. That could be, I mean, we can try that next meeting, right? So I'll put it on the agenda items. It's fairly obtuse because our mandate is fairly acute, like, right? Like the agenda topics aren't super broad because specifically we're really only supposed to talk, opine on one thing, and that's non-consensual, or two things, non-consensual tow rates and answer any questions regarding, I guess, complaints or overcharges from the PUC, which is likely not going to be a thing that happens. So really it's just talking about rates. And so like by definition, our agenda is always kind of the same thing. But to your point though, I think, one, like for example, the agenda for next month, if we determine, hey, let's just go ahead and have one next month and see what happens. A big low hanging fruit, like an easy thing that I think we actually could get done via basically monthly Zoom calls is the CPI thing we discussed, of being like, does the CPI, is that the best metric? Or would it be better to use some other kind of inflation adjustment? That's kind of that's low hanging fruit that I think would not involve a ton of collaborative analysis. That's hard to do in this medium. So I could put that on the agenda next month and just say, hey, like, we're going to discuss the of CPI and all that kind of stuff and see if maybe that agenda item spurs a lot more people joining the call and we could run an experiment effectively. So I think I'll definitely do that and see if that happens. Mr. Prunski.
I know one thing that we had talked about I can't even remember. It's been a while now, but we had talked about trying to expand the scope of the towing task force of things that we can look at beyond just the non-consensual. And what would we need to do to try to look into that potentially? Because I know Mr. Pierce mentioned a few things that seems kind of a little beyond where we currently are, like you mentioned. But I know there were some issues and concerns with doing that, but maybe we could look into trying to doing that too.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. The problem we have, and Mr. Roberts can chime in if I'm off the mark here, is because it's so clearly stated in statute, like what we're supposed to do, we're like hyper constrained. So unfortunately, like the only answer is getting the law changed. But by definition, that's also not our mandate. So we'd be stepping outside of our scope to try to increase our scope, sort of. And so it's just a kind of an unfortunate. I mean, it is what it is, right? Like when they wrote the law, they created a very broad group of folks, which is awesome. But that also, it's hard to get a very diverse group that don't have a lot of like very, acute interests in the topic engaged over a long period of time. And then it narrowed the scope of what we were supposed to discuss to a very specific thing. And that creates difficulty though. But Mr. Robertson, is my characterization correct on that?
Yep, you're right on, Trevor. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so I like Mr. Pierce's idea. I'll definitely maybe I'll propose this. Let's I'll put a more descriptive agenda together, and I'm going to put on let's discussing the CPI just because I want to put something that like is easy and we could do and it's a low hanging fruit in the meeting and people get engaged in. I think and wouldn't have to go do a bunch of research to add to the conversation. And so maybe we do that kind of next month. Let's go ahead and have another meeting next month. I'll put that agenda out earlier. Maybe we even shoot a couple emails to people's personal emails or something if we'd like to remind them. And then just see what kind of engagement we get. And if that gets us to a quorum, then I think, okay, great. Like there's some little chunks of stuff we can bite off if we kind of press this issue a little bit more this year. If it turns out that we have the same kind of scenario play out, which my hunch is that probably will be the case, but I could be wrong. Then I think probably the approach we take is basically filling the statutory requirement. And they put it as a requirement for a reason. That's to have, I think it's 2 meetings a year or 1 meeting a year. I can't remember which it is. 2 meetings a year. So we'll look at the schedule and maybe we have 2 more meetings, maybe one in June and one in like August or September, for the purposes of, well, one, seeing if Nate has some administrative time from the PUC to describe to us. And it could be also that the PUC actually does have some questions on some overcharges or something they'd like to get our input on. So we need to provide that opportunity. And we don't have a statutory requirement there's a reason that the statute didn't require us to produce a report every year. And so it could be that the intent is more like, we're like the National Guard, right? We're here, we meet, we know each other, we kind of understand the issues, we meet a couple times a year. But then at some point, there may be a thing we need to double down on, right? Like we did this last year. And we just kind of, we're a latent kind of group that kind of stays together and understands the issues, and then we're available for regulators or the governor's office or whatever to utilize us. That might be maybe more of an approach that's doable. Mr. Pierce. You're on mute again, Mr. Pierce.
Sorry. I'd like to be helped out a little bit on the statutory mandate issue again. And also just in regard to what we actually accomplished. My understanding of what our consensus was that we were punting on two big issues. One was the recommendations for rate changes. Again, we did not agree that the rates should remain the same. That was not what we agreed to. We agreed that we did not know enough to make good recommendations for changes. And so we did not feel comfortable making changes at that point, in which case the natural follow-up is that this year we are going to make recommendations for changes. And so that struck me as basically something that was pretty much solidly in our court to work on this year. Same thing went for non-consensual rates. The consensual versus non-consensual analysis. We did not feel that we had enough in hand to be able to discuss the difference between the two, and so to make any recommendations about, for example, how non-consensual rates should be indexed to potential consensual rates. And I believe that was the spirit of the legislative intent behind having us analyze the difference between consensual and non-consensual rates. I think we did not come through with that. What John wrote up was very last minute and did not have any chance for the rest of us to look through it. And so I think that's another thing that's very firmly in our court as something that we need to work on, because my impression was that we did decide that was an issue that needed a lot more discussion, and so we were going to punt rather than make a recommendation on last year's report. So so those strike me as very much non-optional for us.
I don't think any of us disagree with it, Mr. Pierce, but like the people who aren't at this meeting aren't my employees. So, we have the fact of life right now is that there's 5 people on this call that are voting members. And so unless that changes, it falls into the is what it is category, unfortunately, I think. So I don't disagree with you, but the reality of our situation is that there's a limited number of us that seem to be interested in participating. And so I don't have the power to compel anyone to join the meeting and be a productive member of the meeting if they did join. And as far as I know, the governor's not going to, have, Mr. Prunski go arrest people for not showing up either. Like it's the nature of kind of volunteer organizations that, people can choose or not choose to participate. And let, maybe Mr. Roberts has some creative ideas, but like, I don't think we can compel anyone to do anything. And so I think what we need to determine is not aspirational, what we wish would happen, but the path we should take right now, given what appears to be the case. And what appears to be the case is people are not that interested in participating.
Okay, yeah, if I can circle back to where my point here is it has to do with what we put on the agenda and what we try and actually address next meeting.
Okay.
And my point is that I really think those, at a minimum, those two topics we need to start moving on those if we're going to make progress towards those, and something along those lines would be beneficial to put on the agenda, and we should at least tentatively plan on starting to try and make headway on those two issues.
Okay. And I think that's fair. I think that's why I think it's a great, your point is well taken, that like, let's try putting something way more specific on the agenda. I'll give the guy a try. Just to see if people show up, and we'll try that next meeting. Like in the scenario next meeting, Mr. Peterson, in which we have a similar outcome, and that difference of agenda doesn't spur a lot of participation. What would you propose we do at that point?
Gosh, I don't have a good suggestion there. That's my main suggestion is that we try and think of a way of actually just jump starting our business, as at least as far as I see what we have on our on our plates to do, and see how best we can get that moving. And I agree, if we don't have a quorum, then there's not a whole lot we can do.
So yeah, I'll do that next meeting for sure. So I'll have a more kind of fleshed out agenda and just, just provide kind of some more detail and some bullet points. And I think I'll put the CPI stuff on there just because, like I mentioned earlier, I think it's low hanging fruit, would actually be pretty easy to do. And we'll see, maybe that spurs some participation. Mr. Prunski.
Yeah.
So to your point there, Trevor, about going and arresting people, that's state job. That's out of my jurisdiction. But just the thought with our report that we had to do by November 1st, are we limited to doing one? Can we do another one at the end of this year?
Yeah, so we're not limited. We could produce a report every year, and and that, if we could, I think that's not a bad thing either. It's not, however, required. So the statutory requirement was for us to provide that report, and then to have 2 meetings a year on an ongoing basis to do 2 things: to discuss rates, which could include us providing a report if we wanted to, but regarding rates. So to discuss rates, and to engage with the PUC if they request our input regarding cases of overcharges. I don't think that's a thing that really happens a lot, but that was put in the statute. And so that's our requirements: 2 meetings, and to discuss rates. That doesn't mean we can't submit a report, and we certainly can, and to answer any questions on rate overcharges. And that's really our only requirements.
That might be a way to try to increase some more interest in getting people to show up, because then that way we can continually keep looking at the issues, looking at the CCI and everything else that keeps changing, and trying to involve everybody in order to keep looking at the issues and see what's working, what's not working, and then still have our yearly report, whether it ends up going or it sits kind of in the file waiting for an issue to come, kind of like it is right now. But at least maybe we can do that, and then that way we're at least still looking at it and looking into things that are working or not.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. So I'll propose this, unless any, I want to see if anyone has any significant concerns about the approach. I think we go ahead and schedule a meeting for, like, what is it, the second or the first Wednesday of next month. Same time. The difference is when I put out the agenda, I'll put a very detailed description of the agenda out regarding discussing the appropriateness of CPI. And we'll see if that will show up just like we did today. We'll see if that gets us a quorum. We have enough people participate. If so, we may be onto something. So then we'll talk about CPI and we'll keep proceeding. In the event that does not spur a lot of people to join the meeting again, then I think I'll probably propose at that point that, like, all right, like, we're going to do 2 meetings a year. Unless some issue comes up, we decide more makes sense. And we'll discuss rates during those 2 meetings. I think maybe having 2 meetings a year, you could get the participation level up a bit. It's like an easier lift for folks, I think. And at that point, we are kind of discussing rates or whatever, and it's unlikely we could produce a good report doing that. I think it was hard enough to try to get any real work done over the course of 12 months. But we can at least discuss them and keep each other aware. And when the time comes, then we're ready to kind of double down again if there's some issues that come up. But that'd be my proposal, assuming we don't get a big upswell of participation next month, but hopefully we do. So does anyone have any concerns about that approach? Mr. Riley.
A couple things. If that's kind of what we're banking on to drive the interest, I would suggest that we get that agenda out and circulated well before the meeting. And did you say the first or the second Wednesday next month?
What do we do? I can't remember what we usually do.
I think we usually do the second Wednesday.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
So that would be April 12th, it looks like.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I would suggest that we get that agenda complete, if you want to do it, Trevor, like you usually do. I would probably suggest getting that to Hadija probably by at least a week before the meeting.
Yeah.
to kind of send it out as a quasi reminder, but a hey, heads up, this is what we're going to be talking about. So that's probably a good idea.
Yeah, Adija, I'll send that to you this week. So I'll go ahead and just get it knocked out.
Okay, for sure.
So I do see we have Ilarali Cherez. Wait, maybe they just left. We had they just left. I thought maybe we had a public comment time person, but they just dropped out. All right. I don't have anything else, folks. I appreciate the time, and we'll see you guys next month. See what happens.